Well, folks, it's only January 7th, as of the day I'm recording this, and we're a week into 2026, and boy, has it been a doozy. Nick Shirley's viral video uncovering systemic fraud in Minnesota has been duplicated across multiple different states, Washington and Ohio, just to name a couple. Tim Walz has stepped down in the gubernatorial race. He's not going to seek re-election. It's unclear if he's going to resign, but he's definitely under a lot of pressure to do so. Then there's a war basically that's escalating in Latin America right now. President Trump went in, captured Nicolas Maduro. As of this recording, a couple of Russian flag tankers have been seized. So, like I said, we're only a week into 2026. It's already proven to be a doozy. I think things are going to get even crazier from here, especially because this is a election year, and typically midterm election years aren't that significant. But just based on the political climate we're in, I think it's going to be a pretty significant election year. So what I want to do today is I want to reflect back on some things I talked about in 2025 and how I thought 2025 was going to go, and then give you my forecast for what I think 2026 is going to look like, and kind of piece things together to give you an understanding of where I think we're going. Personally, I think we're living in a watershed moment in human history. We're literally living through it as it's happening. Our kids are going to read about this in their history textbooks someday, and we're going to have the opportunity to be like, yeah, we were here, we experienced it, we lived through it. I don't want to be hyperbolic, and I risk being hyperbolic saying this. I think this could be one of the most transformational periods in human civilization, period. And there have been massive transformations in human civilizations, right? Think of the fall of the Roman Empire, and then the Middle Ages and the emergence of Europe as a major power center. Obviously, like World War One, then World War Two, the invention of the Gutenberg press and the Protestant Reformation, and the decline of Catholic political power and feudalism in Europe, and the emergence of capitalism and the American project that we all are living in today. I think those are great examples. But those things took place over several centuries, over long periods of time. So you may have been around when Martin Luther nailed his theses on the church door and the Protestant Reformation kicked off, but you didn't know that was happening, and you didn't see the consequences of it because it took several decades, if not, a century or two, for things to really play out and culminate. Like you even Martin Luther didn't know the consequences of what he was doing, and when he did that, right? I think things are different now because we are instantaneously watching the world change in real time. I mean, just look at Nick Shirley's viral video uncovering fraud in Minnesota. This has been something people have been talking about for a decade plus now, but they didn't have the people who were originally talking about, they didn't necessarily have the national reach. They didn't have social media, and they didn't have the ability to have conversations about it in real time and to show up to these places, do a citizen audit, and evaluate what is happening. All of that has changed. So now, as new information comes to light, it's being posted to X. We're having conversations about it real time. I mean, his video was posted right before Christmas, and already today, folks on Capitol Hill are holding hearings to probe this, and then they're bringing folks in from Minnesota to talk about it. And like I said, Governor Walz has said he's not going to run for a third election because of this scandal that's emerging. So we're seeing things play out in real time, and I think that is part of why we're living in what I think is the most transformational period in human history, because we are seeing change happen so rapidly that it's quite literally shocking our system. We're seeing political, social, economic, cultural change happen in such a short period of time. And it's a shock to the system. And then, of course, the entire climate we're living in, where, half the population denies any of this change is happening in the first place. And they're going to gaslight you and, call you names and try to downplay it. So there's just a lot going on. I think it's going to be, it's affecting all of us. There's going to be massive material consequences to this in terms of, finances and employment and your ability to participate in the economy. There's also going to be psychological and spiritual consequences to this as well. And so I think there's a lot at play. So that's why I think this is a pretty significant period of time that we're living in. So it's really important to pay attention and connect the dots to see what's happening. So let's dive in to what I wrote last year. This came out in January of 2025, and this was just an outlook for what I thought was going to happen in 2025. Like I said, I thought, I still do think we're living in a period of historic transformation. Job losses are something I definitely focus on, especially as it relates to AI. Not because I think AI is taking everyone's jobs, but because I think it's created the conditions for restructuring the labor market and workforce and the value proposition of work itself. So where your employment made sense a couple years ago, it no longer does. And that's going to have massive consequences for all of us because our entire world order, for better or for worse, is structured around being gainfully employed. Your social status is predicated on the type of job you have. Your ability to participate in the economy is predicated on earning money. And yes, our government operates based on taxing your income. So if all those things go away, the entire system we're living in is also going to go away. So this is a pretty big deal. So the big thing from last year was that job displacement was already underway, but it wasn't coming from AI just yet. And I think this is super important because there's a lot of naysayers out there who are like, well, AI hasn't taken my job. AI isn't doing this. AI isn't doing that. And it doesn't matter. Just the fact that AI is on the horizon, that AI is advancing technologically speaking, and that more and more companies are beginning to adopt it in initial phases is enough to change the business operating environment and change how people participate in the business environment. So it's not so much that jobs are going away because AI is taking those jobs. It's because more and more companies are anticipating that greater AI integration is coming in the next few years. So they already started doing this in 2025. This is going to continue to ramp up in 2026. Some things that happened last year that helped with this transition, a transition away from human-based employment towards more automated and machine-based employment, was use of return to work mandates in order to enable natural attrition. And so this happened. Lots of companies were saying, hey, you need to come back to the office. And if you couldn't because you had moved during COVID or you didn't want to, you left, and they didn't necessarily refill your vacancy once you left. Algorithmic changes in big tech reduced staffing requirements. So yeah, you do have a lot of new technology that is being adopted in Silicon Valley, and it's changing how they think about how many people they're going to keep on their books. We've since learned as of last year, a lot of skilled and unskilled immigrants alike have been imported into the country. And a lot of those people are on visas. So the H-1B visa program came into a lot of light last year. And that is incredibly problematic because I think people assumed, well, they're all just doing jobs that Americans don't want to do. But when you actually look at where these people are working, they're competing with American workers. So on the unskilled side of things, truck driving is the number one employer or career for young men in this country. And it's also come to light that there is an entire fraud scheme within the trucking industry where you have illegal, so some legal, but a lot of illegal migrants who have gotten CDLs, so commercial driver's license. There's been exposés on this where they'll go into the DMVs that are issuing, states that are issuing these licenses. So California and Washington are two examples. But they'll have cameras on and they'll have earpieces in. And so they don't speak English. They have no idea what they're doing when they're taking the test. So they have someone who's going to feed them the information. And there's this whole network of people who are getting licenses illegally, and now they're driving trucks. And there was a major accident last year in Florida, and ironically, it was an illegal migrant who did a U-turn from the right lane on a highway, T-boned a van that had legal Haitian immigrants in it who I think were going to the beach. So this has become a huge problem. So that's happening on the one side. On the other, a lot of folks have been like, well, okay, in tech especially, we need skilled labor. There just aren't enough Americans to do the jobs that we need. That's not true. It's come to light that a lot of the H-1B visa holders in big tech are working entry-level software developer jobs. And anecdotally, this is something you don't think of these things until they come to light, and then you start paying attention to them once you're out and about. And so here in Austin, there's a lot of tech companies. You have Amazon, that's here, Apple's here, Google's here, Facebook has a presence here. And just walking around, I have noticed there's a lot of Indian workers with badges from these companies. That's not to say that, a majority of these workers they're here on H-1B visas or whatever. But you start to see that around, and you're like, okay, interesting. And I've read on online forums as well, other Indians within these companies who are like, yeah, there's not a lot of white guys working in these jobs. So it's become pretty clear that there is an importation of Indian labor in a lot of these jobs. A lot of these folks are working entry level positions, while at the same time, computer science grads are having a really difficult time finding work. It's come to light that a lot of them have also been automated out of their jobs, and they have an extraordinarily high unemployment rate. But the thing with imported immigrant labor is that their immigration status, or their visas that enable them to live in the country legally, is incumbent on them staying employed. So whether you're in trucking or you're working in big tech, it doesn't really matter. If your employer is sponsoring your visa to be here, they have leverage over you. And so that is a cost savings for companies, because they can pay less because you're going to be willing to work less. Then you're probably going to work twice as hard because you need that visa, right? And so there's a lot of exploitation that's happening, and it's costing a lot of Americans their jobs. There's the offshoring of administrative work to remote countries. In places like the Philippines, India, and Pakistan. I think this is a consequence of COVID. It flattened the workforce. And so employers are looking around and being like, why on earth would I pay a recent college grad to do this when I can pay someone in the Philippines to do this? And then eventually have that person in the Philippines use AI. Once you spin up a enterprise level AI workflow within your company, you can train them to use it, all for a fraction of the price. So that's significant. That's been happening. Workers have been retiring. I think a lot of people post-COVID kind of saw the writing on the wall and they're like, all right, I'm done. Now's a good time to leave. Their positions haven't naturally been replaced. And then, of course, you have companies that are trying to keep up with the competition. Everyone has seen now that Elon Musk's purchase of X pretty much paid off. He got rid of 80% of the staff that were working at Twitter before. He's basically been running the company on a skeleton crew, has turned, I think, a positive ad revenue. I don't know that they're profitable yet, but I do believe they have a positive ad revenue. So he's pretty much turned the company around since purchasing it, and proven how important X is. So I think a lot of executives are looking at Elon Musk's example and they're like, okay, if he can make it work, well, surely I can make it work too. So they're looking for creative ways to get rid of workers. And so, like I said here, one of the consequences of COVID that I think has been understated is that when workers were sent home during COVID and when all of these work from home, work remote mandates were in place, employers were quietly able to look at cost-cutting measures that they hadn't been able to look at before. So I think in 2025, you had a lot of layoffs due in part to changes in the business environment and just changes in general. But and then the years preceding 2025, I think COVID had a lot to do with how employers looked at the value proposition of employment itself. They saw that, well, hey, if we can continue operating from anywhere and workers want a work from anywhere mandate, like, hey, let's do that. And so they did that. It flattened the labor market. And so it opened employers up to being able to arbitrage jobs to lower cost centers. So that means lower cost American cities, also tapping into the global workforce, like I said, in places like Philippines and India. So I think that was part of the process of reshaping work last year. It wasn't just AI. I think a lot of people are blaming AI. It wasn't just that. Another thing was autonomous AI agents were poised to make things easier for employers to integrate AI into their companies. And over time, these definitely are things that will eliminate your jobs. And we saw this happen last year. A number of the big platforms, ChatGPT or OpenAI, Google, I think Claude as well, they all rolled out AI agent protocols. And they're far from perfect. Yeah, I think they're still working out the kinks, but it doesn't matter. The AI agents are here. They're already on the market and they're only going to get better. And just keep in mind that whatever we are seeing here as random people on Main Street, that we're seeing stuff that has already been tested out in Silicon Valley. So whatever we're seeing now with regard to AI agents, just keep in mind that folks in San Francisco are already ahead of that. So if you think the AI agents are bad at the moment, or they're not really doing things well now, those who are building those AI agents are already ahead of the game. They're using the second, third, fourth generation AI agents at this point, and they're going to release those this year once they work out the bugs. And so once AI agents are fully released and they're fully autonomous, it's going to change everything. And this is because you're not going to have to hire human workers to complete abstract tasks anymore. you can basically create your own specialized team of digital interns, basically, who can do the work for you. So they can have specialized tasks. You can program them to do highly specialized things. And so, for example, right, like creating YouTube videos, you can have an AI agent whose only job is to create thumbnails, an AI agent whose only job is to create titles, another one who creates scripts. You can have an analyst AI agent. You can have a channel manager AI agent, right? And so you can do highly specialized things with all of these AI agents, put them together, and then once they're able to do things autonomously, they'll be able to execute on the task. So right now, for example, like I'll use Gemini or I'll use ChatGPT to help me analyze performance on video data. I'll ask for recommendations. Hey, like this performed, here are the metrics, here's how it performed, how can I improve it? How can I optimize it? And then I have to go in and make the changes. Eventually, we're going to get into the point where I'm going to be able to interact with Gemini or ChatGPT in that same way, but then it's going to be able just to go into YouTube or go onto Substack and make the changes for me. So this is where we're going. And this is a pretty big deal. And so think of it in terms of interns, because I think this is where AI agents are heading. Right now, they're at the very like entry basic level intern state. They're eventually going to be equivalent to entry level workers, and that's going to have a huge destabilizing effect across the entire workforce. So like I said, even if you are surviving job losses, even if you didn't lose a job in 2025, even if you think you're still going to be gainfully employed this year in 2026, keep in mind that this is a much bigger picture problem. It's not just like a month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter, year-to-year thing. You can survive the job losses now, but by the end of the decade, which we're rapidly approaching, it's 2026, so there's only 4 years left, you're going to eventually be competing along these AI agents. So if you're not thinking about this now, if you're not prepared to compete with an AI agent for your job, now is the time to really start thinking about this. Another thing I wrote about last year was that college is no longer a gateway to job opportunities. It's become abundantly clear that a college degree is dead. It's pretty much worthless. Many employers still require a bachelor's degree out of practice, but that is also rapidly falling to the wayside because you've seen over time a number of companies have also come out and said, we don't really need a bachelor's degree. So basically, a college degree is no longer the guarantee of a middle-class life that I think we all were told it once was. So what does that mean? That means if you are in college right now, or if you have kids who you think are going to start, teenagers that are going to be looking to enroll in college in the next couple of years, you need to seriously, and I mean seriously, I don't know how much more to convey the importance of this, seriously reconsider sending them to college. It's not worth it. The jobs for millennials didn't pan out. The return on investment didn't pan out for us. It's definitely not, panning out for Gen Z, Gen Alpha, who's coming up behind Gen Z. There's no hope for them, right? So we need to get away from this college to career pipeline that we've created for ourselves, because college doesn't provide the value it once did. It's not going to provide the gateway to jobs and new opportunities that you think it does. And those jobs aren't even going to exist in the future anyway. So, of course, there's an asterisk and a caveat to this. Unless you can get a full ride and graduate debt-free, or you get accepted into an elite school that has a robust alumni network and can act as a direct pipeline to career opportunities, you should not take on debt to finance a college degree. So if you are going to a no-name state school or a no-name private school, there is no hope for you. I'm sorry. Just to put it bluntly, no one, I can tell you right now, just having worked in Washington, D.C., never met a single person who went to the University of Wyoming or whatever the state school is in Idaho or in South Dakota, right? So those no-name state schools, no one cares about them outside the immediate vicinity where those state schools are. Even small private schools, no one cares unless they know. But what people do care about, did you go to Harvard? Did you go to Yale? Did you go to, Georgetown, especially if you're in DC? That kind of stuff matters. So it depends on the career you want, sure. But you're far better off, for example, networking and getting an internship at JP Morgan directly than going to some random mid-tier school, getting a finance degree, and then hoping to apply to JP Morgan later on. Just giving that as an example. So I think people need to really think critically. So this raises an obvious question. If not college, then what? Obviously, trades are coming back into fashion. I think this is a big deal and very important, at least in the short term. I don't know how much longevity there will be to this, honestly. as more and more white collar workers wake up and realize that there's no hope for them in the new AI economy that's emerging, many of them are going to reskill into blue collar jobs. And depending on where they go in the blue collar economy, it could bring wages down. So that's something to keep in mind in the medium to long term. But in the short term, I think trades are going to be the payoff. And believe it or not, skilled blue collar workers make as much money, if not more, than your business analysts at places like McKinsey, and all those people just clicky clack in cubicles all day. So this whole notion that blue collar guys make no money and have terrible lives, like, it's just bollocks. Like they work hard, they do well, and if you're really good at what you do, you have a lot of opportunities to succeed. So yeah, you're not going to get all you can eat buffets, you're not going to get coloring rooms, you're not going to get nap pods, there's not going to be foosball tables like Silicon Valley will give you. But if you work one of these jobs, you're going to have security, you're going to have good benefits, there's going to be dignity. You're going to be going to work, you're going to be doing your job, providing for your family, and that's going to provide an intrinsic return on investment that you're not going to get anywhere else. Well, these places do pay well. So definitely look into trades. There's a deficit of workers in a lot of places right now. So look into that. Another thing is going to be to bypass college and just earn certifications. I've already started seeing this where a lot of jobs now are requiring experience, but also AI literacy. And so just given the nature that we're heading into an AI-based economy, if you want to still have a job in white collar clicky clack office world, you need to become AI literate. And so I think your best bet isn't necessary to get a college degree. It's to focus on getting certification. So can you prompt engineer? Do you know like everything that goes into that? Can you work with and build AI agents? Like, can you vibe code and all that kind of stuff? I think you're better off allocating your time towards that than getting a college degree. So personally, if I were in high school right now, and this was something I was looking into, I would focus on getting as much college out of the way in high school as possible. So you can do that with advanced placement exams. You can do that like part-time enrollment or partnerships with a local community college, doing night classes. A lot of our local community colleges also offer dual enrollment. So like get as much out of the way as possible while you're still in high school. Finish out your bachelor's degree at night while you're still working. So I'd get a job, work, and then do night classes to finish it out, because unfortunately, like I said, it still is a requirement and can be a barrier to entry if you do not have one. So for the sake of credentialing yourself, get one, but don't go into debt or as much debt getting it. And then focus most of your time on getting certifications and improving yourself. I think that's important. And then another thing to consider is just doing the opposite of what everyone has told us to do. So everyone's like, okay, go to college and then get a career. Just start working right away. This might not sound like a smart idea, but like with the trades, if you do a job well, there is a payoff. So forget about what society says. They're going to look down on people who work because that's how we've structured ourselves, culturally speaking. But there's places like Walmart, or here in Texas, Buc-ee's, where you could start working at 16, and then by the time you're 30, if you're like doing your job well, you're constantly getting promoted, you're going from a point where you're like cashier to like managing a department to leading teams. There's a direct pathway in a lot of those places for management roles, and a lot of those management roles pay well. I wrote about this, I think like a year ago, but there are managers of Walmarts who are making $500,000 a year, which is insane. So you can work, like you can get one of these jobs if you work hard. And then the thing too is like you don't have to do this for the entirety of your life, right? Like work your way up, get the money out of Walmart. No different than going to med school, working through your 20s to get all your education, and then becoming the doctor that you trained to be, right? Work your way through, become the manager making six figures, start pocketing money in your late 20s, early 30s, and then you've learned business, you learn how to manage people, you have real world experience. Okay, then do what you love, start a business yourself. You use that to fund what you actually want to do in your 30s and 40s. I think people need to think of things like that instead of this long-term career. It can be a stepping stone. So bypass the education stuff altogether, and you can still like become AI literate on the side too. So you can diversify and give yourself options. But I think college is dead, and I think that much is pretty much clear. Another thing, the debt is unsustainable. So when I wrote this in 2025, the debt was $36.14 trillion. Now it's $38.4 trillion. So in a year, we've added $2 trillion worth of debt to the national debt, which is insane. That's just way too much debt. It's not sustainable. And it's becoming a huge problem. And I think debt is going to exacerbate the consequences of job displacement. Because if you have a lot of debt and you lose your job, you won't be able to access credit to float you until you retrain yourself and find something new. So you're not going to have access to the financial capital, pretty much, right? Your credit cards, personal loans, home equity loans. Think of that as personal levels of capital. So in much the same way, a company would go to a bank or raise money from investors to access capital to expand their operations or reinvest in their business. There are things you can do as an individual to access credit for yourself in order to invest in yourself or to build a business for yourself. And if you're already in a ton of debt, you have a terrible credit score, your debt to income is super high, you're not going to be able to access lines of credit that you might need to help you pay the bills while you take a lower paying job because you lose your job, while you go back to school, while you do retrain for a new AI powered job. So this is very significant and something to keep in mind. So yeah, like the big takeaway, AI isn't going to eliminate jobs, but at least not right away, but it is over the long term. And I do think, this is something I talk about in here, but I do think that there's kind of two forks in the road. So we're either heading towards dystopia or we're heading towards flourishing. I think now I'm leaning more towards the dystopian side. And I think I've always been kind of biased towards that. I'm optimistic that flourishing is going to be possible, especially for those who recalibrate their expectations and come up with a strategy to get by through the transition, not get caught up, not be as adaptable as possible. So be able to flow through it and then come out on the other side and be able to do what they want to do. I don't think it's going to be the human flourishing that Sam Altman and folks in Silicon Valley are talking about, though. I don't think there's going to be a massive redistribution of the gains, the productivity gains from AI to everyone else. That historically has not happened. But I think it's going to be up to us individually to prepare ourselves. And I think there will be a possibility for flourishing through this, but during this transition period we're in, I think it's going to be very, very difficult. It's probably going to be a lot more dystopian. So that's what I wrote in 2025. Pretty much like everything kind of panned out as I thought, and very generic stuff. Trying to keep it broad. But let's dive into 2026. And like I said, this has already been a pretty turbulent year already. Venezuela and the situation in Minnesota with regard to statewide fraud are pretty big stories that are going to shape the rest of the year. But focusing back on, I say the economy, Main Street, how this is going to affect all of us. Job losses are going to continue to ramp up. Workers who lose a job today will find it difficult to regain employment tomorrow. And a lot of this is because the business environment has changed. And like I said in 2025, and I think this is still true today, COVID-19 changed everything. So last year I talked about how it flattened the labor market so that American workers were now competing internationally. Another thing to consider is that up until COVID, we were operating in a business environment where credit was cheap, where you could borrow at next to nothing. Interest rates were like, zero, right? So businesses could borrow, they could hire people, they could do whatever they want. There was a story in the New York Times, oh gosh, I think it was published like 2 or 3 years ago, I forget. But it was about Uber, and it talked about the millennial, oh gosh, I wish I could think of this off the top of my head. The millennial subsidy. And basically what Uber had done is they leveraged cheap credit in order to subsidize rides to create the illusion that rides were cheap. So those of us who started using Uber in the 2010s were accustomed to cheap rides because the company was using credit to offset some of the actual costs, the actual economic cost of providing those rides. And the goal was to get as many users on the platform as possible, because once you become a habitual user, it increases your lifetime value as a customer. And so once COVID hit, once the era of cheap credit ended, that subsidy went away. So everyone talks about, inflation and rising costs of living. There's myriad reasons why inflation is happening. One of those reasons is because that essentially cheap credit subsidy that a lot of businesses were using to offset some of the costs within their business and create the illusion that that things were cheaper than they actually were, that subsidy went away. That cheap credit went away. And so costs rose back up to what their actual market rate was. And even though you and I weren't seeing it when we opened up these apps and we're using these platforms, that was the actual rate that back end economic nerds and accounting nerds were actually dealing with. And so now we're being confronted with this, and you're like, well, why is my Uber so expensive? Well, part of that is why. And so the same thing happened with jobs, is you had employers who were able to access cheap credit, keep people on their books. Part of this was a strategy that they used to keep human capital off the balance sheets of their competitors. So you saw this last year too, with Meta gobbling up AI folks. They got folks from Apple, and they were building their super intelligence team, and they were basically recruiting people to come work at Meta in the same way that, folks in the NBA draft and the NFL draft pay oodles of money to recruit key players to their team. Like, that's how they were treating it. And so this was happening with rank and file folks throughout the 2010s. And so it created an illusion of a world of job opportunities and economy that didn't really exist. So the business environment now, today in 2026, is a lot more expensive to operate in than it was a decade ago. And because there's a promise of AI on the horizon, it's already here, it's being built, and it's getting better. Larger employers are hesitant to bring on new workers. As a result, they're restructuring their organizations to get rid of as much surplus human talent as possible. And they're anticipating that a new AI economy is going to be able to offset their talent needs through automated and non-human sources. So in 2025, we saw major rounds of layoffs. A couple big ones include UPS, as well as Amazon. And I think this is pretty significant because these are market movers. These are people I'd call market movers. So Amazon is the second largest private employer in the United States after Walmart. I forget where UPS is, but UPS is also in the top 10. So when you have major employers that are sending memos to their staff and they're saying, hey, learn AI or you're going to lose your job. Andy Jassy did this at Amazon in June 2025. And then a few months later, announced one of the largest rounds of layoffs in the company's history. Like, that's pretty significant, right? So if Amazon's going to do that, because Amazon is such a major player in the economy and because they are a market mover that shapes the labor market, other companies are going to follow suit. So in part, UPS is responding to pressure that Amazon has put on them in terms of fees, yes, but just in terms of business as well. So all this stuff is really interrelated. So if Amazon does something, its competitors, direct competitors, are going to do make the same changes. Vendors, suppliers, folks operating in warehouses. Amazon had their 1 millionth robot working in a warehouse last year. So any third-party warehouse that works with Amazon is going to have to make those same changes in order to keep their prices down, to still be able to compete and to be able to provide services to Amazon. So this is something really important to keep in mind. A lot of these companies are going to be laying off workers today, are following the lead of these bigger companies that have already started engaging in layoffs. At the same time, last year, the country's largest employer, the federal government, took efforts to eliminate workers. So Doge was pretty big at the beginning of the year. They attempted to root out fraud, waste, and abuse, but weren't as successful as I think a lot of us had hoped they would be. Nonetheless, it led to shuttering of some U.S. agencies, specifically USAID, and more than 154,000 federal workers were given voluntary buyouts, and they accepted those buyouts. So another illusion within the economy has been employment generated by the public sector. So since the Great Depression, to be totally honest, the federal government has been a major employer. So under FDR, you had a number of different public works agencies like the Civilian Conservation Corps, TVA. Like, you learn about all this stuff in high school, right? They created jobs to put people to work. Because people needed jobs in order to get out of the Depression, and the government paid for those jobs. And then you saw later on with the Great Society, with Johnson's Great Society, the expansion of the welfare state, that too provided people with jobs. Welfare programs are by nature expansionary. You get rewarded as a public sector employee by serving more and more people. So there's an incentive to grow the welfare state. So that's why you've seen such a large expansion of the government in recent decades. And so the federal government has been a major employer for folks. I mean, just look at the TSA, right? Like, how many people does TSA provide employment to in airports across the country, right? So it's been a major employer. And so things changed last year with Doge, and things are definitely changing now with the Somali fraud scandal in Minnesota, where there's no longer a toleration for a lot of these welfare programs. There's no longer a toleration for big government, and efforts to root out fraud, waste, and abuse, I think, are gaining steam. And so the employment opportunities that the government once provided, it's just no longer feasible for the government to continue providing those opportunities. So this is also going to affect workers because it's going to result in job losses. And these people are not going to have opportunities to regain employment in the private sector because the private sector isn't adding jobs either. So pretty much if you lose your job this year, there's a good chance you're not going to find one until maybe 2027 or 2028. So you're looking at quite a while. And again, this varies. It depends on what industry you're in. But I think for a lot of people, this is certainly going to be the case. It's going to take far longer to regain employment than I think most people are used to. And even if you do regain employment, it's probably going to be at a lower level. So if you're at a manager level now, you might have to, come down a notch or two, become an individual contributor again, and take a lower paying, lower status job if you want to stay employed. So it's going to affect a lot of things. And so because AI integration is going to be far more advanced later on this year than it is at this very moment, employers are at a point where they're actively transitioning to non-human workforces. And you're seeing this at companies. Salesforce started doing this last year. The financial sector, so if you're not paying attention to the stuff that like Goldman Sachs is doing and JP Morgan is doing, definitely subscribe to my Substack because I talk about a lot of this stuff in a weekly newsletter I do. But they're doing a lot of pretty significant stuff that Amazon is doing. They're already beginning to implement changes. So whereas 2025 businesses were anticipating AI adoption, we're now in the early stages of AI adoption, not just AI, also robotics. So even if you need a new job, because of all the changes in the business landscape, because of changes in the public sector and the jobs that are available, there's not going to be jobs for you to get moving forward. So this is going to be a pretty big year to really start thinking critically about your career and your job prospects moving forward. This is going to affect new workers, so entry-level Gen Z, recent college grads, particularly hard because they're going to have fewer job opportunities to enter the labor market than in the past. The Wall Street Journal did a survey of employers, and they found, or it wasn't the Wall Street, this was published in the Wall Street Journal, but the National Association of Colleges and Employers, they gave their outlook, and they said this is going to be the worst, job market on record. So every year, things are getting worse and worse and worse. And so this is why college is a losing proposition, because if you already graduated from college, in the last few years, you haven't been able to find a job. You're stuck working hourly or gig work. And if you did, find a job, you're probably stuck because a lot of these employers are freezing wages and they're not promoting people. So there's nowhere for you to go. If you're graduating now, so if you're going to graduate in the spring of 2026, moving forward, you're competing with people who have already been in the market looking for jobs for 4-5 years at this point, so other Gen Zers. And then on top of that, you're going to be competing with millennial and Gen X workers who have been laid off, and they have to come down a notch or two in terms of where they're looking for work because the management level positions they expect to get aren't going to be there. So folks are being compressed from the top, but then also from the bottom because obviously AI is getting better. And why would anyone in their right mind hire a Gen Z worker who's going to complain, not show up, and demand a bunch of things when they can just hire an AI agent to do the work, or not hire, but license an AI agent to do the work. They're not going to complain. They'll do it exactly as they're programmed to do it. You don't have to pay them PTO, or they won't take times off. They're not going to be political activists in the office. Obviously, it's a no-brainer. Everyone's going to start hiring these or licensing these AI agents. So this is a pretty big deal. One of the things, though, that folks don't realize with regard to the competition between entry-level workers and AI agents is that they're both coming into the labor market with the same amount of knowledge. So basically book smarts, like the same books and training materials that are being used out in San Francisco to train AI agents, those are basically the same things and the same process of learning that college students are using in college, right? So they're both entering the labor market at the same level. The thing that sets a worker apart, a human worker apart from a machine, is institutional knowledge. It's those soft skills. It's the ability to interact with other humans. And so the problem for entry-level workers in Gen Z is because they haven't been able to get entry-level opportunities. They haven't been given a shot. Basically, the first two rungs of the career ladder have been cut out, and there's nowhere for them to start climbing. They're not gaining any institutional knowledge. So as they get older, their ability to be employed is going to diminish because they're not bringing anything to the market that an AI agent doesn't already have. So they have nothing unique to offer, and this is going to permanently handicap them and leave them sidelined from the labor market in the future. And then, of course, like I said before, because human workers or AI workers don't require PTO and health insurance, and they're not going to complain or anything like that. Like entry level workers just don't stand a chance. And I know this is like doom and gloom, but you have to get your head out of the sand and see the world as it is, not as you expect it or want it to be, and see the world around you. Like, this is clearly no longer a viable option for Gen Z. They have to course correct. They have to think and do things differently. That means retraining. That means going into a trade, becoming AI literate, just straight up going to work. If you're 21, 22 years old and you have a college degree, go be a Walmart cashier and work your way up. It sucks, I know, but like, you gotta do something. Start a business, do something, right? And so the other thing that's really going to affect workers as well, and I think it's going to especially affect Gen Z, but it's going to affect everyone, is because in the absence of these white collar entry level jobs that are supposed to provide a level of employment that somewhat enables them to pay back their student loans and provide some modicum of a return on investment on their education, they're going to have to look for other forms of employment because obviously they still have bills to pay, right? And so these workers are going to be left with, I think, two options. So either you work hourly, part-time retail, or you're going to do gig work. And the problem is, I don't think part-time work or retail work is hiring in the ways we expect, whereas in the past, you could just go and apply and get a job somewhere. I don't think that is the option for much longer. I'm working on a special report that I'm going to release later this year on Substack. But I've been going around and applying to jobs myself and trying to see what's actually happening in the market. And so far, it's not looking too good. So stay tuned. Definitely subscribe if you want more info on that later on. But then the other thing too is that as more and more people are feeling desperate, like they have nowhere else to go, they need jobs, but they have no one, they can't get a white collar job, they can't get a full benefited salary job, and they can't get, hourly work at their local Gap or Old Navy. What other option do they have? Well, a lot of them are going to turn to gig work. The problem is the gig economy is also being undone by automation. You saw last year partnerships between DoorDash and Waymo. There's competition as well with illegal migrants, and so this is pretty significant, but you have drivers who are registered with Uber, but they're subleasing out their accounts basically to illegal migrants who are willing to work for less. So overall, this is going to drive wages down for workers. And if you've taken an Uber over the last several years, you've probably noticed this. Like, I've only taken Lyft maybe a handful of times in the last year or two, mostly coming from airports, but locally maybe once or twice. And the quality of rides is just, there's folks driving with broken windshields. The cars you're getting into, you're like, is this street legal? So you're seeing definitely a decline. And so I think the folks who are already in the gig economy, who know what to do, they're doing well. But if you're a new entrant, you don't know how to play the gig game. It's going to be a race to the bottom in wages. So you have people who are going to start working for less and less and less. And I don't know if this is true. I saw a Reddit post that a back-end developer at a food delivery company, I suspect it was probably DoorDash, posted on Reddit, but basically confessed that they have special tags within their system. And so they can determine who's desperate enough to do the low-paying gigs versus who's not, based on a number of different data points around you. And we do live in a big data world, so this is very feasible. So keep this in mind that just because you work for a gig economy app like DoorDash or Uber doesn't mean you're going to get the same value on your time as another worker. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be paid, fairly. A lot of these people are paid after you deduct your business expenses. Literal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. So this is stuff to keep in mind. There's going to be greater competition for a diminishing demand for gig work, and it's going to push people, desperate people, down even further in terms of wages. So it's something to really think about. I think the Main Street economy is going to continue to descend into a recession. So whatever facade of normalcy that exists in 2025 is going to finally fade away. I think we've been living in a recession since 2008. I don't think the financial crisis ever subsided. For some folks, those who had access to cheap credit in the 2010s, I think they did okay. But for Main Street, I think it's been a hot mess ever since then. And we've been gaslit and told that everything is fine, everything's wonderful. For my generation, we all went to college and we kind of did that, and we were sheltered in a bit, I think, from the consequences of the financial crisis. But I think in reality, a lot of the stuff that we're experiencing now, economically speaking, is a downstream consequence of the financial crisis. And so, for much of the last decade, I think workers believed in the illusion that was created by cheap credit and the idea that there was an infinite number of job opportunities in places like Silicon Valley. And so they spent money as if jobs were infinite and expecting that, well, one day everything will work out. One day I'll get the job and I'll be able to pay all this off. And one day has come and we're all still, in debt and have not been able to pay it off, right? So a lot of people during this period of time use creative financing strategies to keep up with the charade of a booming economy, keep up with not just the Joneses, right, but keep up with the expectations of the world around them. And, if everyone else is going out to dinner and happy hour and brunch, well, surely I can too, right? So that lends itself to a lot of people swiping credit cards to be able to finance things, keep up with the illusion, right? And I think this is completely done. I think people realize the student loans didn't pay off. Continuing to charge social activities on credit has only left people maxed out. And now we're seeing car loans with, longer and longer notes that people can't afford. So I think 2025 was the year I think a lot of people started to feel the pressure and started to feel that, okay, well, I'm at the brink. I can't do this anymore. Now I think in this year and moving forward, people are just they're going to stop. They're going to deflate their lifestyles. They're going to stop spending as much. They're going to come to terms with the new normal of the world that they're living in. And so I think this is going to be pretty big deal because this is going to be a loss of lifestyle and status for a lot of people. I myself, just speaking from my own experience, 3-4 years ago, I was going to coffee shops every day and working from coffee shops. Now I work from home all the time. And a large part of that is, changes in my own workflow. And then the rising costs of going to those coffee shops and getting a cup of coffee. Like I still go, just to get out of the house, but lattes now are $8, $9, $10 some places. So it's like, okay, we have an espresso machine here. There's a coffee pot here. Like, what's the point? I think a lot of people are starting to ask, they're looking at restaurants, they're looking at coffee shops, different social activities. They're seeing poor service, a poor return on their investment. Concert tickets are through the wazoo now. I think people are like, what's the point to any of this? And so they're going to change how they spend and deflate their lifestyles as a result. Meanwhile, I think a lot of these workers are going to be unable to maintain whatever lifestyles they're accustomed to. So those who can accept the changes are going to. Those who can't are going to, deal with the consequences of not doing so. But at the same time, and this is a bigger problem, that's a systemic problem within the economy, is that capital concerns are going to push investors to move their money out of productive ventures and into safer assets. So what do I mean by that? So in the 2010s, you saw a ton of people who were like, yes, venture capital. Here, if I'm a wealthy person, yes, please take my money and invest it. They were going after unicorns. They were providing high returns. That's no longer the case. That is no longer the case. You're not getting the returns that you once did. So instead of just throwing your money into risky business ventures, if you have wealth and you want to protect it, you're putting it into gold. You're putting it into safer assets. And so that's moving capital out of the economy. If venture capital isn't getting this money, if banks aren't lending the money, right, if you want to start a business, like you're not going to be able to have access to it. So it's going to result in tightening of credit for the rest of us who want to access it. And so the fuel that the economy needs to keep going. So consumer spending, capital, it's non-existent. It's not flowing anymore. And so I think you're going to see major contraction this year on Main Street as a result. Out of work, consumers are going to be forced to deflate their lifestyles, like I said, but it's not just DoorDash and lattes that they're going to have to forfeit. Americans are also going to have to grapple with rising food and energy costs, reducing them to levels of poverty they're unaccustomed to. So it's not just that like you're going to have to give up your latte in 2026. It's that you're going to have to, I think a lot of people are going to have to reconcile the fact that they're actually in poverty, and they don't know how to process that. Like, how do you come to terms if you have a college degree, you did well in school, and you've been working hard for the past decade or two? How do you come to terms that you're actually in poverty and you're no better off than someone who's on welfare, but actually the person on welfare is far better off than you are because at least they're getting free money from the government? You're working hard and you have nothing to show for it. I think this is going to have a tremendous psychological effect on a lot of people. And so in 2026, these Americans are going to face new levels of hardship, not because they can't keep up with the facade of a middle class life, but because even modern day subsistence is rapidly becoming unaffordable. So just think about life in terms of like a subsistence level, like the bare minimum that you need to survive, not just, the fun stuff, not, going out to dinner, getting takeout, lattes, all that kind of stuff. Like, just think about the bare essentials. Modern workers today need food, they need housing, they need energy to survive. And that's because we're all disconnected from being able to produce these things for ourselves. So the difference between workers today and subsistence farmers in feudal Europe is that the farmers in feudal Europe knew how to farm, but they couldn't own the land. So because they couldn't own the land and they didn't have their own land to work on, they didn't have the means to produce food for themselves. The difference between then and now is that we don't have any of that knowledge. The average person doesn't know how to grow their own food. They have no idea where to begin. They can't produce their own energy. So we're all completely dependent on employers to provide incomes to us so we can purchase these things, and then corporations to provide these services to us to meet our day-to-day needs. So as employers no longer see a value proposition in human labor, and as big corporations see greater need to extract as much resources from consumers as possible, because we all see the charade is coming to an end, this is really going to squeeze workers. So, just give you some examples. So in the last decade, home prices have gone up by 42%, while rent has increased by 56%. Food prices have skyrocketed. I analyzed this on my own last year, but I kept a detailed log of everything, an itemized log of everything I purchased over the last year. And it's pretty substantial, the increases. There's some items I purchased that went up 10, 20% just within a 12-month period of time. And so that's pretty significant when the currency you're paying for those goods in is rapidly depreciating, or if you're paying on credit, you're using buy now, pay later, or you're charging on credit, coming with double-digit percentage interest rates. Like that's a pretty big deal. The costs are going up. You're not making more money, and you don't have the prospect of being able to get a new job or getting an advancement in your job either. So those things are a big deal. But the other thing that's going to impact people a lot this year are rising energy costs. And this is something, I'm going to be totally honest, I did not see coming when I was initially analyzing the AI infrastructure push at the beginning of last year. My initial thought was, okay, these are going to provide new jobs to folks in places where AI based like data centers and stuff like that is being built. And that is partly true. There is demand for labor in those places. But one of the downside consequences of this is that data centers require a lot of energy, like a lot of energy. And so what we've started to see already in 2025 is surging electric bills. So since 2020, electricity prices have gone up by 40%. And in places located in close proximity to data centers, the wholesale price has gone up by as much as 267%. So electric is going up, it's skyrocketing, and there's nothing you and I can do about it because electric isn't customer agnostic. It doesn't discern between who's a commercial user of electricity and who's an average consumer like you and I. It just pools demand and then charges based on the aggregate demand. And so if you are a random homeowner and you're competing with a data center, the data center is going to drive up the price and you're going to have to pay for it, right? And so this is going to be a pretty significant deal, not just because of the cost, but because of the consequences if you can't afford the cost. So on top of the general increase in the cost of living, consumers are now struggling to pay their electric bills. If you fall behind on your utilities, it's not just the power that's going to get shut off. Utilities are reported to major credit bureaus, so they're on your credit score. And having electric is often a requirement of a lease if you rent. So while if you're a homeowner, you can probably get by getting your electric shut off. It'd suck, but you can do it. If you're renting, that's usually not an option for you because if your power gets shut off, that could be grounds for terminating your lease and getting evicted. And if you have an eviction notice or if you have a ding on your credit score, that could effectively prevent you from getting access to housing moving forward. So you could be completely blacklisted and shut out of the housing market. And so not only could you face higher electric bills, but you can face homelessness as a result. So this is a pretty big deal that is going to be worth paying a lot of attention to as this year progresses and moving forward, because this is going to exponentially increase the cost of living crisis. And so all this that I've laid out so far, a lot of it has to do with employment. It has to do with your ability to earn income and how you're going to spend money. So I think financial strain is going to coalesce into political polarization. We've already seen a surge in political violence in 2025. It's continuing even now. As of this morning, before I started recording this, it was reported in Minneapolis that a woman was shot and killed during an ICE raid. She was protesting and was hampering the ICE agents' ability to do their jobs and suffer the consequences as a result. So we're already seeing violence explode. And so I think the loss of lifestyle, the loss of ability to maintain whatever modicum of a middle-class life you want, I think a lot of anger, seeing welfare queens, seeing illegal migrants, legal immigrants, and in communities like the Somali community in Minneapolis, harvesting and extracting and exploiting taxpayer dollars, I think is going to push people to the edge. I think there's just a lot of financial stuff that is going to push people to the edge. And we're going to see greater political polarization that was simmering under the surface and was, I think, starting to really manifest last year. I think it's going to finally boil over. Frustrated people with nothing to live for will feel compelled to take action, and things are going to become increasingly violent. So we saw a number of shootings and assassinations last year, vandalisms, growing number of attacks on federal government agents, which is a pretty big no-no. I think a lot of that is going to increase. I mean, even as of like a day or two ago, there was an arrest made over someone who tried to hammer out a window at JD Vance's private home in Cincinnati. And again, that is a pretty significant deal. One can only assume that this wasn't some random burglar. Like, you kind of know who the political homes are in your local community. If you show up to JD Vance's house with a hammer and weapons, you're probably wishing to do him harm. This is significant because JD Vance is probably going to be the presidential nominee in 2028. So you had two attempts on Trump's life, right? One near miss. You had the fatal attack on Charlie Kirk, and now a potential attack or presumed could have been an attack on JD Vance. Like, this is pretty obviously targeted political attack. So this is, I think, only going to keep ramping up. One thing I wrote here, something to keep in mind: the French had a disdain for the monarchy in the late 1800s, but they didn't storm the Bastille until rising bread prices pushed the peasantry to the brink of starvation. So this is why I think the finance stuff is really important, because people were really pissed off about the French monarchy in the 1780s, right? But they didn't take action. They started taking action when they could no longer afford to put food on the table for them and their families. Like, when you have Jean Valjean stealing bread and going to prison for it, like, that's obviously a time for action. So I don't know that we'll have a French Revolution-style revolution here in the United States, but if prices continue to rise and people, especially younger people, have no hope for the future, and nihilistic fatalism continues to take root as the ideology that they see moving forward, I think people are going to be pushed to take action. And I think this is going to also manifest in the loss of trust in our political institutions. They're already, like, no one trusts the media. No one trusts the government to do their job. I think there's a degree of, like, recognition that there's not much we can do, right? I mean, Nick Shirley has proven that there's a glimmer of hope that maybe you can produce a YouTube video that'll go viral and things will change. But for the most part, I think a lot of us feel, okay, there's nothing we can do. Even Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene announced her departure from Congress at the end of 2025. And she admitted this, like, Republicans and Democrats are the same, two sides of the same coin. They're both playing the American people, and there's really nothing that we can do about it. So it's clear we're at a tipping point. It's clear people are getting frustrated, and it's clear that the system as it's been working is no longer viable moving forward. So I think a new political movement, what is looking to be the America First movement, is starting to slowly pick up steam. This is not going to be Democrat or Republican. I think it's going to be similar to the surge of nationalism that Europe saw on the eve of World War I, which was a pretty big deal because that led to World War I, which is a pretty significant war. And here in the United States, we learn history from the perspective of World War II because that's all we seem to care about. But really, World War I was probably the most significant war in all of human history. Very consequential. Everything that happened after that is a result of World War I. So I think it's really important to pay attention to the causes of World War I and how Europe got to a point where it even broke out in the first place. So while a third option has never been successful in American politics, one thing I'm concerned about is that people are feeling so dejected and demoralized that they might not show up in 2026 at all. So the only people who are going to continue participating in the political system are people on the extremes on both sides. And that is going to further amplify polarization and the perception that those on the other side are out to do harm. So that's important to consider. So a couple of takeaways I have. Economically, I think we're moving away from capitalism. I think capitalism has been completely corrupted. I'm a fan of capitalism. I think capitalism is really important. But like anything in excess, you can push something too far and it's no longer the good it once was. Water is a great example. Water is essential. You need water to live. If you drink too much water in too short a period of time, it can kill you, right? So I think capitalism has been completely bastardized, and some new system, economic system, is going to move forward. Techno-feudalism seems to be the one that is going to be the replacement. But unlike the past, like I said, where peasants had skills so they could farm, they just lacked the ownership of the land to do so. Techno serfs today are going to be completely dependent on the new system that emerges. So if you don't want to be dependent on that system and you don't want to be a techno serf, you need to start planning now, because I think that's the direction we're heading in. Politically, the country isn't unified, and we have to stop pretending like this is the United States of America, because we're not united at all. There's growing animosity between leftists and MAGA. This is pitting brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor. You have families who have completely cut off ties with one another because of how people vote. Relationship between men and women is at an all-time low because of this as well. And what's really driving a lot of this is the fact that we no longer live in the same reality with the same baseline set of facts as the people living right next door to us. And you saw this with Nick Shirley's expose on what's happening in Minnesota. Almost immediately, you had CNN going out and trying to call him out as being a MAGA right-wing influencer who made up everything. And there's people, I'm sure, on the left who have no idea what's happening, or they don't believe that it's happening because who it came from, because Nick Shirley produced the content and not NPR and not CNN. So we live in a world where objective facts are no longer mutually agreed upon. You have a group of people that is like, okay, there is fraud here. Here's the documentation. We need to investigate this. And you have another group of people who are like, no, this is white supremacy. This is made up. You're just a xenophobic Islamophobe. So we have not just irreconcilable differences in terms of our values and what we believe in, but we can't agree on the same facts. And so that's a pretty big deal. So I think people are at a loss. And there's a loss of faith in the system. And it's like, okay, what's the point? And if we do fight to uphold the Constitution, whose Constitution are we upholding at this point, right? We can't even agree on how the 14th Amendment should be interpreted. So I think we're at a fork in the road. I think there's two options that are going to pave forward. One is going to be one of French Revolution style violence. I think there's going to be those who are going to fight to preserve what's left of America and fight for the American project, while there's going to be those on the left who are going to fight to create a new version of America that they wish to emerge. And then I think the other path is going to be one of survival. So those who don't see the merit in fighting, they're just going to look to bide their time, right? They're going to, get the resources. Think your preppers and your homesteaders. They're going to get the resources they need, become self-sufficient, bide their time, wait until the violence subsides, and then figure out how to exist in the new system that emerges. I don't know which side is right. I don't know which path is right. I think there's merit to all of them. But I do think, bloodshed is not the way to go. I think history has proven that. War is incredibly violent, and I don't think we've adequately learned our lessons from the past. So I do not wish violence on anyone. So I'm more inclined to go the survival route. That being said, I don't want to see America fall, because I do love this country deeply. And I do want to see the continuation of America moving forward. And I want to see not just the continuation of America, but the American dream and what it was built upon. And this idea that you didn't have to come from royalty. You didn't have to be nobility. You could work your way up. You could be an Andrew Carnegie. You could come from poverty and you could work your way up. I think we need to restore that. So that's, kind of my vision for the future. But I think we're definitely at a precipice. So whatever life you were accustomed to before COVID, and you think maybe one day we'll go back to that, I think that's gone. I don't think we're ever going to go back to the 2010s. That is a period of time that existed, that we were all living in. I don't think we're going to go back to that. I think we've been trying to figure things out in the post-COVID world since then. And now I think a lot has coalesced. We're in this new AI economy. The political situation has deteriorated. social interactions with one another have continued to fray our social fabric, right? So I think we're at a precipice where the past is the past and something new is about to emerge. So whatever status quo you're used to operating on, throw it out the window. No, college, your relationship with money, your relationship with spending, your perception of your value based on your employment, throw it all out the window. I think we're entering into a period of something new, and you have to make yourself as adaptable as possible to figure out how to navigate that. So to close, I do want to share, I have written about this. I published a book at the end of last year that talks about this. It's called Human Optional, and it's about how to survive the death of knowledge work in the age of AI. And it covers 3 core areas, a lot of stuff I touched on in this video. So talks about why you're going to lose your job. So all the different structural reasons for losing your job, not just why AI is going to take your job. Who's going to be most affected by this? So some people are going to be more affected than others. Like I said, entry-level workers, Gen Zers, are definitely going to be at the forefront of this, but other workers are going to be impacted too. And of course, what you need to do to adapt. Like learning how to use AI is part of it, but it's not just that. Like you need to make sure that you have a foundation for yourself so you can navigate all the uncertainty that's about to come. So this book is available right now on Amazon, so you can get it as Kindle for an instant download. And it's also, if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. So, and I think there's like a really good deal with Kindle Unlimited. It's like pretty cheap to get that. So if you want that, that's an option. I also published it as a paperback. So if you want a physical copy, you can order that too. It's print on demand, so I think it takes a little bit of time to get to you, but that's an option. Anyways, highly recommend you read this because I like I said, I think we're living in a very transformational period. This is a framework to help you understand what's going to happen from now and in the next coming years. So definitely check that out. Let me know what you think. And if you enjoyed this essay that I dove into, I publish regularly on Substack over at Tomorrow Today. Lots of good essays on there. Definitely check that out as well. Thank you as always for watching and listening. I appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, definitely like, subscribe, share with anyone you know, and I'll see you in the next one. Have an awesome day.